Every book is better with humor. It doesn't matter what genre you're writing, every time you can make the reader laugh, it's as good as making them cry or worry about the characters or hate an antagonist. This video isn't designed to help you write a comedy, it's designed to help you inject humor into whatever you're writing so the reader enjoys it a little bit more. And spoiler alert, this video contains 0 knock-knock jokes. You're welcome. 1. Don't try to add humor. Humor really comes from situations and characters. If you create those right, then humor is gonna follow. What humor isn't is it's not just Googling some jokes and like sticking them in the story. It's not like writers are queuing up dad jokes whenever they want the reader to laugh. What do you call a bear with no teeth? Gummy bear. See, 0% of you are laughing right now. Take a look at Zoolander. This is a comedy that comes from a character. Yes, he's very dumb, but he's also very good looking. And when you have a character who's dumb but just happens to be a male model, you can have situations like an accidental gasoline fight accident. Or after he's worked in the mines with his father and his brother for a day, he can cough pitifully and say,
I think I'm getting the black lung, Bob.
If you don't have Derek Zoolander, there is no humor in the story. So if you want to be funny, start with a character. The second good strategy for humor is to highlight the absurd. So David Foster Wallace in Infinite Jest decides that in the future, companies are going to be able to sponsor years the way they currently sponsor sports stadiums. So instead of the year 2029, for example, we would have the year of the Depend adult undergarment. He doesn't choose Ford as the sponsor, he doesn't choose Pepsi, he chooses an adult diaper company. The very concept of companies sponsoring years is like just outside what seems possible, but you'll almost believe it. Or Douglas Adams in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he asks this very serious question about what is the meaning to life, the universe, and everything. And then the giant supercomputer, which is supposed to know absolutely everything, comes back with the answer
42.
Yes, it's an absolutely absurd answer, and that's what makes it funny. One of my favorite examples of going to the absurd in a storyline would be in Anchorman, when the rival news teams just have this all-out battle. The violence is just way beyond the pale, and I just love this concept that rival news teams are battling it out in this back alley brawl. A third strategy, if you want to add some humor to your book, is to use exaggeration and understatement. So for this joke, like you just want to push the joke a little farther. You just want to repeat it a few more times. Think about in Monty Python and the Holy Grail when the Black Knight keeps on insisting as his limbs are chopped off, "'Tis only a scratch." He loses an arm, then he loses his other arm, then he loses his legs. Still he's like, "I'm fine, let's keep on fighting." I think if you stop at just one arm being cut off, it's not quite funny yet. It's the fact that limbs keep on being cut off and the Black Knight's still like, "I'm good. Like, let's keep fighting." Another great example of this is in Bridesmaids in an insult scene. The character that Kristen Wiig is playing gets into this knockdown insult war between her and a little girl, and it's much funnier because it's a little girl. And at first they're just like sort of vanilla insults, and then they get hard and dark, and somehow it's hilarious. Or in that same movie when they get food poisoning, you could just have them, you know, throw up or just show it off screen or something. Instead, you get this horrible vision of like coming out both ways, and it's absolutely disgusting and revolting, but because they pushed it so far and showed you what was actually happening, it's also funny in a very disturbing way. Another great example of just pushing that humor further using exaggeration is one of the funniest books that I've ever read. It's called The Sellout by Paul Beatty. Now, if I try to describe the story to you, you're gonna think that doesn't sound funny at all, but just you gotta trust me on this one, okay? So it is about a black man living in Los Angeles who tries to reinstitute slavery and segregation, and he grows artisanal watermelons. And then he gets brought in front of the Supreme Court while smoking marijuana. Once again, you just gotta read it. I honestly can't explain it. But in that book, he keeps pushing the ideas until you're like, this is so wild. I cannot believe an actual human being wrote this book. It is ludicrous. And for more examples of exaggeration, check out my Bookfox Academy. That's 11 courses that I have that guide you through things like writing techniques and sentences that sometimes use exaggeration techniques, and also my novel writing course, which will guide you through this process of adding some humor to your book and actually, you know, finishing the book as well. A fourth way to sneak some humor into your book is to use running gags. Look, don't be afraid to repeat a joke. Right? It's fine to have like an ongoing joke with just little tiny variations as you go to make it feel fresh a little bit every time. I once heard the theory that things are funny the third time you say them, and then they don't get funny again until you repeat them for the 7th time and onwards. Somehow the very repetition of it finally like clicks our funny bone and we're like, okay, that actually is funny. Look at a book like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter Thompson. So the Hunter Thompson character is accompanied by his lawyer, and in the book he's a 300-pound Samoan. In the movie he's Benicio del Toro. And what this character keeps keeps saying is, as your attorney, I advise you to, and then gives advice that no attorney would ever give. I mean, there's not a lot of lawyers out there who advise you to get a lot of drugs and then rent a fast car, get an enormous amount of guns, and then just, see what happens in Las Vegas. And he keeps repeating that phrase, as your attorney I advise you to, and somehow it manages to be funny throughout the entire book. Probably because you wonder, like, is this guy really an attorney? Another running gag that works really well comes from The Office with Dwight and Michael. You might know what I'm gonna say here, but in a minute, and it involves Dwight's workplace title. Is it, as Dwight would prefer it, assistant regional manager, or is it, and Michael would say, assistant to the regional manager? Season after season after season, they pull out that joke. It is a running gag and it works really well. Or take the sci-fi book series The Expanse. There's a great running gag in the book, less so inside the television series, where basically someone points out that their ship, the Rocinante, is stolen. And Alex is always very quick to point out, it's a legitimate salvage. Like, he's deeply offended that someone would call his ship stolen. Maybe it's not funny the first time, but through repetition, as you keep on going with it, like, readers recognize the humor in it. Also, comment below with your favorite running gag from a television series or from a book series. The fifth step in making your readers laugh is funny dialogue. One of my top 3 all-time funniest books is The Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Imagine a 30-year-old man-child living with his mother in New Orleans, working as a hot dog vendor, but imagining he is a philosopher. The stuff that comes out of this character's mouth is just unbelievable. Canned food is a perversion, Ignatius said. I suspect it is ultimately very damaging to the soul. You could tell by the way he talked, though, that he had gone to school a long time. That was probably what was wrong with him. I actually can't even tell you some of his funny lines of dialogue, at least not on a platform like YouTube, but trust me, he is one of the most ridiculous and funny characters ever written. Another book which I dearly, dearly love and always laugh out loud at is Catch-22. And there's this great, like, who's on first sort of silly dialogue routine in it. Now, where were we? Read me back the last line. Read me back the last line, read back the corporal who could take shorthand. Not my last line, stupid, the colonel shouted, somebody else's. Read me back the last line, read back the corporal. That's my last line again, shrieked the colonel, turning purple with anger. Oh no, sir, corrected the corporal. That's my last line. I read it to you just a moment ago. Don't you remember, sir? It was only a moment ago. It's okay if the vast majority of your dialogue isn't funny, right? I don't think most books it's going to be that way. But if every once in a while you just sneak in a comedic line, or you have one character who is frequently funny, it goes a long way in really helping your book be entertaining for the reader. The sixth step is the comedic rule of 3. So basically you list 3 things, and the first 2 things establish a pattern, and then the third one is the exception to that pattern, and the farther it is an exception, the more funny it is. A comedian would say that the first 2 sets up the norms, and then you break that norm. For example, my favorite books are Moby Dick, The Great Gatsby, and Rock Hard Abs in 30 Days. There's this wonderful expectation that, oh, the third one's also going to be a serious work of literature, and then you completely destroy that notion. Or let's go back to Monty Python because, Monty Python's great, and let's look at the bridge scene in The Holy Grail. There's the bridge troll, and he's asking them questions before they can pass. And the first 2 questions are like, very normal, very natural.
What is your name? What is your quest?
And then the third question is always something wild and off the hook, like,
What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Mel Brooks also used this technique in World War I, where he has this vendor going along all the injured men saying, shampoo, shave, bloodletting? I even saw this comedic rule of 3 when I was vacationing in Cabo. I was sitting on the beach with my friends, and when vendors came by, they all said the same 3 things. They'd say jewelry in a high loud tone, then they'd lower their voice and say pipe, and then they'd lower their voice again and say weed. And that series always cracked us up, especially like the lowering of the volume. The 7th step to getting some humor into your book is to choose funny names. The start to a funny character is often a funny name. And just because you have one amusing character name, it doesn't mean everybody needs an amusing name, right? You can just have one comedic relief character. Sherman Alexie actually has this character called Tapwater, and he reveals that when he lived back on the reservation, his name was Springwater, and then when he moved to the city, he changed it to Tapwater. Or Terry Pratchett has this character called Cohen the Barbarian, which is only funny if you realize that Arnold Schwarzenegger used to be Conan the Barbarian, and this is like a riff on that. And Cohen, which is a very Jewish name obviously, constantly like riffs on Conan the Barbarian's lines and sort of repurposes them. So someone asked the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan, like, what are the best things in life? And Arnold says,
crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of their women.
And then Terry Pratchett has Cohen the Barbarian ask the same question, and he says, hot water, good dentistry, and soft lavatory paper. I mean, it's a great satire of Conan the Barbarian. Another wonderful name is Major in Catch-22. So his last name was Major, and then his father named his first and middle name both Major. And when they got to the army, they thought he was a major, so they promoted him from sergeant into a major, so now he was Major. Honestly, it's just a great way to poke fun at some of the absurdities of military life. So step number 8 is some of the dangers of writing humor. I would recommend that you don't try to be funny all the time. So look at the number of jokes in your manuscript, and if you have like a lot, I would sort of cut down the worst ones, right? Only keep your very best material in there. And I think it's also a good idea to have non-funny sections, because your book works by contrast, right? If it's funny all the time, there's no relief for the reader. What you want are some sections with some pathos, with some sadness, and then when it comes back to humor, the contrast will make the funny parts even funnier. I also think there's a danger in straining to try to make a joke, and sometimes when you strain too much, it just comes out a little, gosh, I'm trying to make a constipation joke and it's just not coming out. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is you gotta let the humor unfold organically. And the last and final tip for writing humor is, what won't you joke about? So I do think all writers need some kind of line in the sand. You need a limit that you say, okay, like, it's all fun and games, I'm fine with joking, but like, I'm not gonna joke about that. And I'm fine with dark humor, right? It makes me think of The Big Lebowski, when they have this whole speech and then let go of the ashes of their friend, and then it all just blows back into Lebowski's face. I mean, I think that's hilarious. But I think it's helpful for you to come up with rules of like, what won't you do? Sherman Alexie says that he never punches down. In other words, he tries not to make fun of people who have less power than him. And I think that's a good like general guideline when writing humor. Shane Gillis actually does a really funny bit on people with Down syndrome, which you think like, are you sure, bro? Really? But I think it works because he's not mocking them. He's more talking about it like from the inside, because he has a brother with Down syndrome. And he always jokes like, oh, I nearly got hit by it too. He ducks. And Bill Bryson says his line is he never jokes about people with handicaps or with disabilities. And he also says he never tries to knowingly offend someone. Still, I would recommend that you come up with your own guidelines about what you will joke about and what you won't joke about. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope you feel a little bit funnier now.